who was notifying us that they had planted an explosive device on site and they were demanding payment.
Senior Vice President Glenn Gordney, no signs of explosive devices found in any of the locations targeted. An artist turns tragedy into triumph in light of the deadly and destructive campfire in Butte County. Jesse Mercer collecting items from people who lost their homes.
I just thought about it deeply and thought, wow, the one thing that we all have in common when we left that morning was that we all had our keys with us.
Mercer using the keys to make a sculpture of a phoenix, the fire bird that rises from the ashes. Her art studio burned down in the fire, but she found enough tools in the rubble to start her project. So far, she's collected 1,000 keys. Jeff Scott, California News.
It's maybe the night that my dreams might let me know. All the stars are closer. All the stars are closer.
Tell me what you gonna do to me. Confrontation ain't nothing new to me. You could bring a bullet, bring a sword, bring a morgue, but you can't bring the truth to me.
Alexa, play Kendrick Lamar and SZA.
Okay. Maybe the night that my dreams might let me know. All the stars are closer.
With Amazon Music, a voice is all you need. Get tens of millions of songs. Download the Amazon Music app today.
Get ready to feel the difference of the new Tomorrow Hybrid mattress. Designed by the world's leading sleep experts at Serta Simmons Bedding, the Tomorrow Hybrid mattress combines the luxurious comfort of memory foam with the unrivaled support of individually wrapped coils. Sleep cooler with no motion transfer. Try the Tomorrow Hybrid mattress for a full year risk-free. For 15% off your total purchase, use promo code AWAKE5. TomorrowSleep.com.
How would you feel if you had to make a choice between buying food or spending your fixed income on life-saving medicine? No one should make that trade-off, but many low-income seniors are forced into difficult decisions like this every day. Smiles for Seniors Foundation provides energy assistance and safety net services to struggling low-income seniors in the Inland Empire. They provide one-time assistance to seniors to meet specific financial needs. They've helped with food, housing, utility payments, minor home and auto repairs, along with life-saving prescriptions or medical equipment. A nonprofit foundation funded entirely by donations from local organizations. Smiles for Seniors receives no funding from the state or federal government. They are funded by local businesses and individuals like you with big hearts and willing wallets. You can find more information or to donate to Smile for Seniors at 909-790-6671. That's 909-790-6671, or visit smilesforseniorsfoundation.org. That's smilesforseniorsfoundation.org.
KCAA, where every day is a great day.
And now, it's For the People with Judge Herb Dodell.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Gary just reminded me that this is the last show of the year.
Yes, it is.
Wow, I guess you call us our Christmas show.
It's your Christmas / Hanukkah / Kwanzaa / New Year show.
When is Kwanzaa this year?
I have no idea.
Comes late, I think.
Well, Hanukkah came early.
Yes, it did.
And Christmas always comes the same time.
Same day. Maybe the same day.
Same time. And
anyway, I want to talk about something very interesting today, because I was mentioning to you before.
Yeah.
If people were asked what's the most famous Supreme Court case that they could remember, assuming they weren't students and hadn't gotten themselves involved in history and political science, what do you think is the most famously known case? Supreme Court.
Well, I would say probably the abortion one, Roe versus Wade.
That's right. That's right. And I read the opinion recently.
Oh, you did?
I did. It's long. It's very long.
Like how many pages?
Well, I read it on the computer, so I didn't know how many pages. I didn't see if there was a page.
How long did it take you?
It took me about an hour.
An hour?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking as I was going through, because it was really a very, very complicated opinion. More complicated than most people have any idea about. And so I said, this is a case that's been discussed regularly, even in the presidential campaign. The whole object is to get rid of Roe versus Wade. And you hear that over and over and over again. And there's the people who were supporting it, and then there are people who are opposed to it. And this is a pretty divided group. The pro-choice people are very strong in seeking its affirmation. And the anti-abortion people, the pro-life people, they're equally as strong. Religious backgrounds, analytically, emotionally. There's a lot to this case.
Very polarizing.
Yeah, but I don't think people really understand what the reasoning was in Roe versus Wade. It's not as simple as people think it is to decide whether or not abortion could be made legal to the states through the 14th Amendment. Last week we talked about various amendments to the Constitution, and I didn't mean to minimize it, but some of those amendments are pretty bland, dealing with the election and of the president and the vice president. The most serious one was the revocation of a prior amendment, which was prohibition. There's an amendment to the Constitution that says you can drink.
What
so you have authority.
That?
You have authority. I'm trying to remember if it was the 21st or 22nd Amendment.
I think it was the 21st.
I think it was the 18th that prohibited the use of alcohol.
18. I don't like 18 anyways.
But the bottom line was that was a pretty significant decision because the country had been operating in the dark. Really, prohibition was criminal, but nobody paid attention to it. Everybody kind of honored it in the breach. So there were other amendments, one dealing with the succession of the president and the vice president. The Eighth Amendment dealt with what's called cruel and inhuman punishment. The Seventh dealt with right to a jury trial.
They're pretty important, Judge.
Yeah, well, and the 13th Amendment, which was a very significant amendment, ended slavery, abolished slavery.
Really, that one?
13th Amendment.
Yeah, that's been in the news a little bit with Kanye West.
Yeah, well,
spewing his.
I don't know if
nonsense.
there's any intellectual argument about that. The fact of the matter is, it's pretty clear. It's a one-liner. You don't see much litigation over it. That's why you don't hear any real dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But Roe versus Wade, most people talking about it, and 95% or more have no clue what the depth of that analysis was.
I mean, I don't.
It was written by a fairly substantial, I think he was somewhat moderate toward the end. Harry Blackmun was the justice who wrote the opinion. It was a 7-2 opinion, decided in 1973. But it really was the second important case on the subject. People don't know about a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. It was decided in 1965, and the opinion was written by Justice Douglas, who I thought personally was probably one of the greatest justices we've ever had in the Supreme Court. We've had some outstanding justices, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Brandeis. We've had some very, very good justices. Even the Chief Justices, Earl Warren and Warren Burger. There have been some very, very bright people.
What do you think of Rehnquist?
I wasn't a big fan of Rehnquist.
Okay, I just saw something.
He wrote a dissent in Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
He and I believe it was Justice White, Byron Wizard White, the great football player.
There's a great movie, Judge. I think you'll love this. It's about Muhammad Ali. His greatest fight, and it's all about the Supreme Court and his fight with the Supreme Court. And basically, it's like all these great actors portraying like Wizard White and Douglas and Rehnquist and Thurgood Marshall. You'd love it. It's called Muhammad Ali, His Greatest Fight. Check it out. It has to do. I just watched it over the weekend. It has to do with the Supreme Court.
But you know, there are several other principles that are involved here too. One is called stare decisis. One of the things that was bandied around during the recent nomination of Justice Kavanaugh dealt with stare decisis.
What's that?
Stare decisis is what our entire legal system is based on. It means that if you have a decision, it becomes the law of the case. Using that word loosely, it becomes the law of the case. And even though the Supreme Court may evolve, it changes politically from president to president. Sometimes presidents nominate liberals. Sometimes they nominate conservatives. Sometimes they don't really know. One of the great, allegedly, faux pas was the nomination of David Souter.
Right.
Who was from, I think he was from New Hampshire or from Vermont, one of those two places. And he was supposed to be a conservative.
Nominated by Bush, right?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
He turned out to be anything other than a conservative.
Right.
And even some of the real conservatives, like in the Griswold case, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, one of the people supporting that decision was Hugo Black. Hugo Black was a real Southern conservative from Alabama. And he was a very, very conservative judge, they thought. Turned out to be, as he stayed longer on the bench and as he was doing the court, his thinking was evolving. He became far more liberal at the end of the day. And the same thing works in reverse. I think people are assuming too much when they think of this current Supreme Court, even though it's obviously a conservative court now, 5-4 for sure. I'm not so sure Chief Justice Roberts can be counted on for every single conservative view.
Yeah,
he's shown some. He's shown some independent. I can't say the same thing for Alito, for Clarence Thomas.
Forget it.
Because they're not going anywhere. They're straight down the line.
Yeah.
And I don't know about Gorsuch because he hasn't really decided anything. But the fact of the matter is, Roe versus Wade is on the chopping block, and that brings in the subject of stare decisis. When they were interviewing Kavanaugh, I think Susan Collins, I think, was the one that mentioned it. How would he feel about basically reversing Roe versus Wade? And he apparently told her that he wouldn't do that.
Right.
Maybe yes, maybe no.
He said it was,
stare decisis.
Yeah.
The law is the law is the law.
The law is the law. Yeah.
Unless something has dramatically changed since 1973, and there doesn't appear to be any such change, it should stay the way it is. I don't take a position one way or the other, but it comes down to free choice versus pro-life.
Yeah, he said he wouldn't change precedent.
It was
a precedent.
Well, this is a precedent.
Yes.
It's a Supreme Court case, 7-2. It wasn't even close.
Yeah.
But the reality of the decision goes back to Griswold, which was a case that tested the constitutionality of a statute in Connecticut. We're going to talk about it right after the break.
All right. It's Judge Herb Dodell for the People. And if you want to get his book, it's not too late for Christmas, From the Trench to the Bench, available on Amazon.com. And check out his YouTube videos. We've shot like about 70 of them now.
Yeah, we have.
It's crazy. All right. We'll be back with more of the Judge right after this.
10:50 a.m. KCAA. Herb Dodell is a lawyer and a judge for the people. Having served as a Superior Court judge, presiding over more than 9,000 cases, he has witnessed firsthand how complicated and corrupt the legal system can be. His goal is to show how things really work in the legal system so that people can navigate the legal system in the best way for them. Many people often feel marginalized by the legal system and are uninformed about how to proceed when unfortunate circumstances arise in their life. Judge Herb will pull back the curtain, lift the veil, so people can truly understand their rights, have access to top legal personnel that they can trust, and have knowledge about how things work so they can make better choices. Judge Herb isn't just knowledgeable. His integrity and spiritual values are truly what make him different. He cares about democratizing access and information for all and desires to turn on the light so the people, you, can benefit. For more information, email the judge at askjudgeherb@gmail.com. That's askjudgeherb@gmail.com.
Okay, well, one of the things that we really attempt to do on the show, not only to provide you with information, but to look at things a little bit on the intellectual side as well, and to have some discussions as to whether or not things mean what they appear to mean. And in addition to entertaining people with stories, real stories, of what's happened in the system when I was practicing full-time, and from my now 10 years on the bench, The reality is that we try to make it informative. So today's talk about Roe versus Wade is meant to fill into that spot. Last week we had somebody here talking about fires, and then we've had Roger Stone, and we've had Lee Baca, and we've had all kinds of different subject matters, how to do it, when to do it, what to expect, what does it all mean. That's part of our program. That's why each week is different. So I was going to get back to Griswold, because I remember Griswold was decided, I think, the year after I got out of law school.
Okay.
So it was a hot case at the time.
Now this was like the first. Case. This was like the first abortion.
No, it wasn't abortion. It was
okay. Tell us
what it was about. Was Connecticut had a statute that prohibited the use of contraceptives.
Really?
Yeah. It was against the law to use contraceptives.
Like anything?
Like any contraceptives.
Like
birth control pills mainly.
Okay, but not like condoms.
No, any birth control device.
Even a condom you couldn't use in Connecticut?
It said contraceptive devices, so you wanted to define it as that. I guess you could include that.
Wow.
The bottom line was there was a test done by Griswold. She was fighting it.
Who was Griswold?
She was just a nice lady who she was actually working with Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
At the time. And the argument against the statute was that it invaded the right of privacy. I mean, how do you enforce that? Would you hang out outside somebody's door and you wait for the howl, and then charge in? I got you, Oh, right. What's that pillbox over there? But this really comes down to even Roe versus Wade. When it comes down to as a final decision maker, it dealt with the right of privacy. And so in the Griswold case, another United States Supreme Court case, they said, no, the right of privacy is provided to us through the 14th Amendment. Now, among the amendments that there's, I think, 27 of them now. Among the amendments, the 14th Amendment basically says that the application of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which is basically the first 10, and the subsequent decisions were the significant part of our judicial system. And the right of privacy flows through the 14th Amendment to the states. That's the purpose of that amendment, is to make all of the federal rules applicable to the states.
Okay, so once it becomes a federal law, it rules all the states.
Yes, it kind of preempts
the state law,
whatever it may be. And they also talked about the Ninth Amendment. Now, the Ninth Amendment is kind of bland. I mean, I read that one recently, too. It basically says that because your rights are identified in any statute or any ordinances, the fact that it's not mentioned doesn't mean you haven't got it. In other words, the intention of the framers was to make it available to everybody and make it a broad definition. And so what you've had over the years has been a fight between the people who see it as a broad declaration versus those who say it's narrow. That's the fight right now. In fact, they were calling some of these Supreme Court's activist judges. An activist judge is somebody who doesn't take it literally, who sees the Constitution as evolving, who sees some of the language as perhaps ambiguous because when it was written in 1789, we didn't have the same kind of definitions that we have right now, like the Third Amendment. You know what the Third Amendment is? It's one of my favorites.
No, I don't.
You can't force somebody to harbor military people and make it into a hotel.
What?
Really? You can't force people to provide provisions for the soldiers.
Oh, because of what happened when the soldiers were well, in England, they used to take over homes and stuff like that.
That's what they were trying to prevent happening.
Yeah.
So that's the Third Amendment.
Wow.
In fact,
who knew?
And another case that came down about the time that I was getting out of law school dealt with the Fourth Amendment, which we talked about briefly last week. It's a very, very important amendment. It's to guarantee the safety of your home, to be free of unreasonable and unlawful searches. And that case was called MAPP, M-A-P-P, versus Ohio, another Supreme Court case, which pretty much said you can't break into somebody's house unless you have a warrant.
By a search warrant.
And you can't search even incidentally to other things unless you have a warrant. But there are exceptions, and that MAP case was a leading case in that subject matter. So if people are listening to the show and they want to do a little of their own digging, just go to Google. Look at MAP versus Ohio. You'll find out all about warrants and search warrants and things of that nature, and it's unreasonable searches and seizures.
That's really interesting about the Third Amendment, though. I mean, how it's evolved. Like, nobody even really, it has no meaning really here nowadays. I mean, unless the government wants to take over your home or something like that.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, of course not. But I'm just saying, back in the day, like, when we were fighting England, they used to, the British used to take over homes, and it's famous movie, The Patriot, with Mel Gibson. They basically took over his home and then burned it down and burned the churches and did all sorts of crazy things like that. And took over cities and towns.
That was one of the reasons for the Third Amendment.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
The First Amendment is really, without going into any great detail, because there are hundreds, thousands of volumes written on constitutional law. I mean, this document that started back in the late 1700s has dictated the way this government is run for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
But different people have different interpretations of what's contained in that document. That's why there are volumes and volumes and volumes. And Obama was a constitutional lawyer. I think he was a teacher of constitutional law.
Yes, he was.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because literally probably I'd say 80%, 75, 80% of the people really don't know anything about the Constitution.
That's why I wanted to do Roe versus Wade today, because people use that term all the time but have no real clue as to what it means. If you asked anybody on the street, what was Roe versus Wade? Oh, it means you can have abortions.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the ruling.
Or it's about abortions.
Well, yeah, what they did, because I was starting to talk about it, Griswold was really a right of privacy case. And it was applying through the 14th Amendment to all the states. And the right of privacy is found in the First Amendment.
Okay, so it had nothing to do with abortions. It wasn't like Griswold wanted to have an abortion. She just wanted to be able to have the privacy to have a contraceptive.
And they were married. She said that it was an invasion of their marital privacy.
It is.
And so a case came out shortly thereafter where the couple was not married. And they extended Griswold to circumstances involving pretty much everybody.
Right.
The right of privacy is one of our most protected rights. And so you can see the development of some of these cases. That's why I mentioned MAP. And that's why I mentioned Roe versus Wade. And there are other cases that have stood out, Miranda, cases that stood out for particular principles which have become the bulwark of our democratic society.
So the
right of privacy. That's what Griswold was.
That was about right of privacy.
Right. And so when Roe came along, and by the way, her name was Norma McCorvey Nelson. That was her real name. Jane Roe was the way it was filed.
Okay.
But
like Jane Doe, Jane Roe.
Right.
Okay.
And there were some does in that case too, by the way. But Norma McCorvey wanted an abortion. In the law in Texas.
I was in Texas, okay.
Wade, by the way, was the deputy, I think he was the deputy district attorney of Dallas County. And they were enforcing the law. She wanted to have an abortion, and they said, if you do that, you're going to go to jail.
Really?
Against the law in Texas. So she sued Wade, and it worked its way up through the system, through the federal judicial system.
Now, during that period, was there ruling? I mean, there had to be rulings in her favor or the deputy DA's or Wade's favor.
There were so many different elements of the case that part of them was moving in one direction, part was moving in the other. There were victories for both sides. In fact, one of the parties was seeking an injunction to prevent the application of that law. I think he was the doctor. It was in that case, and he lost.
Really?
Yeah, they didn't grant an injunction because the ultimate conclusion was, since we've declared it to be unconstitutional, we figure that the states will do it on their own, because all the states were then bound by the rulings. But it was not just that abortion is legal. In fact, it says so very clearly. In fact, he repeated himself a number of times, Blackman. I guess he was trying to make a point. The fact of the matter is that you can only have an abortion in the first trimester without violating anything. And the government will not get involved, or should not get involved in that. They say it's a right of privacy decision. That's why it goes back to Griswold. And in the opinion, it refers to Griswold versus Connecticut as well as a leading indicator as to where this was traveling at the time. And so they specifically mentioned that the states, all states, depending on what they decided to do in their own states, could legislate as to what would happen in the beginning of the second trimester. It has different requirements. They can. And the magic words are compelling state interest. Those are the magic 3 words. Compelling state interest. So a state can involve itself in regulating your conduct if there is a compelling state interest to do so. And you see that same thing happening on a regular basis today, when there are questions that are quickly evolving. Different states look at it in a different way.
So the first trimester is a federal law. It's bound. It's bound.
You're fine anywhere in the country.
In the country, as far as the first trimester. But after that, the second trimester, the states have the right to create their own laws.
Well, and here's where Roe versus Wade is a problem,
because that's sort of strange.
But the language is so broad as to what a compelling state interest is.
Yes.
And so therefore, does that mean you can control A, B, C, and D in Dakota and something else in Delaware? I mean, it's very, very, very broad. It mainly is to protect the life of the mother. And one of the interesting discussions, and this is really what gets a lot of people excited, not happily excited, is the discussion of when is a fetus a person.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
They went through this thing over and over and over again and concluded that there's no authority, none, anywhere, other than people's arguing about it, that defines when a life really becomes a life. Is it at conception? Is it at some time elsewhere? And that was discussed at great length in the opinion, in an intelligent way, too. Blackman was a smart guy. So we'll talk more about that right after the break.
All right, it's for the people with Judge Herb Dodell. Talking about Roe versus Wade. We'll be back with more of that right after this.
NBC Talk Radio, 1050 AM, KCAA.
In his book, From the Trench to the Bench, Judge Herb Dodell demystifies the legal system, including both civil and criminal, the lawyers, the judges, and the process. As a judge, former deputy district attorney, and criminal defense attorney, he knows the legal system. He has the inside information that you need to pick a lawyer, and he's here to give it to you. No matter what you're facing that makes you think you may need a lawyer, Judge Herb will shed valuable light on your situation and reveal your best options and many secrets of how the judicial system actually works. To find out more about how the legal system really works, you can get your copy of Judge Herb Dodell's eye-opening book, From the Trench to the Bench, at Amazon.com.
Okay. I recommend that you read this case, Roe versus Wade. As long as it is, I think you're going to find a lot in it that you never knew existed with regard to this whole subject matter. It's very much like restraining orders. I'd like to come back to that because I sat in restraining orders for like 6 years. I mean, that was my assignment. And just like in that court, everything is a balancing act.
Well, what blows me away is that, and we were just talking off the air about it, is that really, I mean, the states have complete control after the second semester and can set up their own laws. And they do, and that basically you think, and I think it's going to happen too, is that there's going to be some sort of challenge to it in the next year or two.
Yeah, well, one of the big issues, of course, is the religious issue of when is there really a viable fetus, and medically they know that, and the states can do it it's in 3 trimesters is the way they work. The first one they got to leave them alone. The second one, if it's a compelling state interest, they have the right to legislate whatever it is. Somebody's going to take that up.
Yeah,
that's where it's going to be. Because at that point, there's still more of an argument that it's not quite yet a human being. I don't take any position on that. But the fact of the matter is that by the 3rd trimester, most medical people will say that that's pretty viable. That your child can even be born during that 3rd
6
trimester.
months.
Well, trimester, end of 6 months.
Yeah.
And so the bottom line is going to be the states can do that too. But they have a more broad authority because they're closer to birth. And so the legislative intent that's going to be somewhere is going to be focusing on that and making more of an argument that this is a real person, not just a fetus.
Let me ask you a question, Judge. I mean, let's say the woman wants to have the child 6 months into it, 7 months, and all of a sudden she gets into a life-threatening situation where if she gives birth, she could lose her life. I mean, these are decisions that I don't understand why there's going to be a court involved and that some other person is going to make that decision. I mean, isn't that between you and your faith?
Well, that's what the argument started with in Griswold. That was the argument that was made. It's up to you, what you want to do on your own world, and it flops over. By the way, I think the case was called Miller, but I'm not really sure. Dealing with pornography, there was an argument at one time. I think I mentioned to you last week. I was the lawyer for a movie called Deep Throat.
Yes, I know.
Only the distributor. I didn't have and I never met anybody.
You never met Lyndon.
Only the distributor.
Okay.
And he wasn't a handsome guy.
Wink, wink. No.
I appeared before. I took him to the grand jury when they had him before the grand jury. The bottom line is, in the area of obscenity, they wrote many opinions relating it back to the First Amendment, which is the right to do whatever you want to do. You're not hurting anybody.
Yeah.
Whose business is it?
Exactly.
So you get into people who are the conservative, arch-conservative people who say the government shouldn't do anything on one hand, and on the other hand, they're saying the government shouldn't allow other things to happen.
Well, only what they like.
Well, it's the same thing for the liberals.
I know.
They say the exact same thing.
I agree. They're both the same. There's no difference between either one.
But the bottom line is somebody's going to test this for sure.
Yeah.
The 3rd trimester, when it's talking about abortions at that point, the child is developed a whole lot more, and so the risk is greater, and the damage is potentially higher because it's a child that's almost ready to be born.
Well, like I said, life-threatening situation for the woman. I mean, that has to have some account.
Well, I think but that makes every case separate.
It should
because
be.
there's no real, from my reading of it, and other people may disagree, from my reading, there's really nothing so specifically determined and defined that you could say it's going to work in all these cases. It may work on some, but it may not work on others.
Yeah.
And so they're going to end up being in the courts. I was talk about restraining orders because I've heard hundreds of cases in the restraining order court. Many of them are a balancing act. You have somebody out there yelling and screaming and doing all kinds of things, and when they get stopped, they argue First Amendment right to free speech and free assembly and all of that, and they do. On the other hand, there may very well be a compelling state reason, that's the words, to prevent people from doing that because they pose a threat. You can picket, and that's okay, but you can't stop people from walking by to get into the place because you don't like what they're saying or doing. And there's a Huntington case that's directly on point on that exact same subject. And so it's not a whole lot different. When I was thinking about it as I was reading Roe versus Wade, there's pretty much a similarity. It's free speech, free rights versus government interference. Restraining order means restraining. It means stopping.
Right.
It means the government is stopping you from saying or doing something under the penalty that if you do it or say it, you're going to go to jail.
Right.
That's pretty serious.
Yes.
And so the bottom line is every case is different.
Yeah.
The free speech people believe you can do pretty much anything you want, and many people agree with that as long as you're not hurting anybody.
I agree.
But the minute you become, and that's what I used to think about when I was deciding to issue or not issue a restraining order, is there really a threat to somebody? Because if there's a threat to somebody, it changes the right to free speech to the right to protect the public.
Or protect yourself. I mean,
Well, you're not yourself. You're basically asking the court
to protect you.
To protect you.
Right.
You're doing it yourself, but you're doing it in the context of a court proceeding, and you have to balance the scales and decide whether or not the government should step in and stop you versus let you go out and do whatever you want, and damn the circumstances. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, the abortion issue and all this is just a little. I mean, because it's a woman's body, and what the system is trying to tell women is that they don't have control over their body and what they want to do with it. This is how I look at it.
Well, there's also a control issue. Some religious denominations and some people who are really very, very pro-life say that they have to step in. It's murder if they don't step in.
But that's, that's between you and your maker. These people on earth are not gods. They're human beings, okay, that believe whatever they believe in, their religious right to believe. But a woman or somebody, a couple possibly, has the right to make that choice. And that's what they have to deal with. And they have to deal with their maker and their religious right.
But that's exactly the point. It's all about free choice.
Exactly.
We were created on a spiritual level. We were created and put here to do something. Something. We all have a purpose. Sometimes we don't know what the purpose is. Sometimes we do. But
drinking is my purpose.
But we have choice. And when you make a choice to do A or B, you're bound by that choice, and that's why you made it.
Yeah, but that's your right as a human being. And what I don't understand is why other human beings are trying to take other people's rights away. And they have no, what's the word? They have no dog in the fight, except for their belief.
Oh, no, they do have a dog in the fight.
Well, the dog in the fight, but it's their religious belief or it's their mindset. That's their dog in the fight, instead of thinking for the person going, you know what? It's your right to do whatever you want. And I say this on my show all the time, is that, listen, if you want to go out and, do drugs or do whatever you want to do, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, okay, then that's your right as a human being. Now, I don't agree with it. I don't want to, I don't think you should be doing heroin or, having abortions or doing whatever. I don't, I mean, it's your right, though. It's your right to do it.
But see, if I was to play devil's advocate
Please do.
with you, I would say, you know what? If you're following your theory that you should be able to do whatever you want to do as long as you're not hurting anybody else, it should make no difference what you do, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. But there are people who come say, no, but I don't want you to do that. Even though you have the right to do it, or you can make free choice to do it, we don't want you to do that. Here's the rules. This is the rules that we have promulgated, and this is the way you're going to follow it. And so you can make that argument all the time. In fact, people, the free speech people, the people who are really very much advocates for the First Amendment, that's what they say. It's free speech, it's free rights, it's to do whatever. The other group is the conservative group that says, no, you can't, because we have a compelling state interest to prevent you from doing that, because we think you're violating our moral principles.
Your moral, yeah.
That's
their moral principles.
And it's very interesting in the body of either Griswold or in Roe. There was an interesting discussion as to what took so long for anybody to argue about abortions. Until the 1920s, it was pretty much people did whatever they did.
Right.
There was no rules, no regulations, or anything else like that. It was only when the Catholic Church and religious people got behind this anti-abortion effort that any attention was paid to it, and it didn't even come directly. It came through Griswold, because the Griswold analysis was basically what we just talked about, the right of privacy, the right to do as you choose to do, the right to have pornographic material if you want it in your own house. I find it a little inconsistent with some of the way that is being enforced these days, because they still find some things illegal.
Right. Well, I mean, you know,
that are pornographic, like pornography, the kiddie porn.
Yeah, well, that's terrible. And bestiality.
But if you would have followed, I don't. But if you would have followed the logic of it, they should be able to do whatever they want to do. I think it's horrible personally, and I think that this is a situation where there is a compelling state interest to do something about it.
Well, that's harming.
There's a limit.
You know what? That's harming somebody. When you're talking about child pornography, you're harming a child by putting them in that position because they're too young to make the right decision or the wrong decision.
And that's a great support for the argument that should be in some way enforced.
Correct.
And I agree.
Right.
I agree with that too. Subject, of course, to the same Fourth Amendment right that you have to have a due process. And by the way, when you talk about the 14th Amendment, it's referred to sometimes as the Due Process Amendment. You're entitled to equal protection under the laws. That's where that phrase comes from. Equal protection means everybody got to be treated the same way.
Right.
And so the balancing act is, in every circumstance, to determine what's good for the public and what's not good for the public. And then the question is, who makes that decision?
Well, like I said, listen, it's the same argument that I'm going to make again. As long as you're not hurting anybody, like if you want to go have an abortion or you want to have a gay marriage or if you want to do heroin or drugs or anything like that, as long as you're not hurting anybody, why should other human beings stop other people from doing it? As long as you're not hurting anybody. I mean, these are decisions that you have to make personally in your life. And if you want to go down that road, great. You know, and that's what I understand why other people want to control other people. They're the righteous ones. But guess what? Those righteous ones, and you're talking about the Catholic Church. Do we have to mention what they've been going through for the past 40, 50 years with the pedophiles and all the priests and all that? Here they're preaching God's word, man of the people, man of God, and they're doing these terrible things to young kids. That's what the hypocrisy of it all. That's all I'm saying.
Well, hypocrisy isn't limited to that kind of subject matter. People are hypocrites about lots of things.
I understand that. I'm just making a point.
But the only reason I mentioned it is because there was a historical analysis done in the opinions that this wasn't a big issue until somebody made it a big issue.
Well, the Catholic Church, like you said.
Well, it's not only the Catholic Church anymore.
I know it's the religious right. Anyways, we got to take a break, Judge.
Okay, right afterwards.
Radio, 1050 AM, KCAA.
Did you ever meet a lawyer that was for the people? Someone who had the best interests of the people at heart? Herb Dodell has been a lawyer for more than 50 years and has been a Superior Court judge for 9 years, having presided over more than 9,000 cases. In this show, he will reveal the secrets of how things really work in the legal system, so you can maximize your position and benefit most when you're in trouble and need someone on your side to simplify the process for you. For more information, email the judge at askjudgeherb@gmail.com. That's askjudgeherb@gmail.com.
And, of course, there are political consequences for all of this. It has become a real political football. In many elections, it can be, and it probably is, the determining factor as to whether somebody's going to get elected or not.
Totally.
If you come across as a pro-choice person in certain districts, you got zero chance of getting elected, and vice versa.
Absolutely.
And so it has become a political football. And it's not a particular church or a religion. People cross all kinds of lines because that's what they personally believe. But the question comes down to, and that's why I started to read Roe versus Wade, is about your right of making a choice. You're here, you've been given the greatest gift you could get, which is the right to make free choice. That differentiates us from the animals. And the reality is some animals act better than we do. But the fact of the matter is, you got the opportunity to do the right or the wrong thing, and you pay the price for it.
Yes.
And we talk about cause and effect on almost every show. I try to stick it in somewhere. And the fact of the matter is, if you do the wrong thing, it's going to bounce off that mirror that's above us in another dimension, and it's coming back to you in chaos.
I agree.
And so if you say these people are too aggressive in preventing other people from doing things and vice versa, there's a price to pay for that. But I do believe that in this next election, there'll probably be a case winding its way through the system.
How long does it usually take? Like, what? Let's say somebody challenged it next year, or something happened. How long would it take to get to the Supreme Court? Because it's going to go to the Supreme Court, right?
I can't say it would or it wouldn't, because just recently, and it was kind of interesting that
I told you about this actually.
The two dissenting votes, Kavanaugh and Roberts, voted against granting a writ of certiorari, which is a review by the Supreme Court, which is a voluntary thing.
Right.
And so they may just decide they're going to leave it alone and leave the federal rule as it stands. And that's where you get a guy like Kavanaugh, who may just say, you know what, he's a very religious Catholic and probably has anti-abortion views, and he has a right to have those views, whatever they may be. But the job that every judge takes, every judge, and I thought about it many times, you have to follow the law.
Right.
Your personal opinion as to whether you think somebody's right or wrong, or you like him or you don't like him, whatever, is totally irrelevant, should be totally irrelevant. And so if he does an analysis and says, I believe in the rule of law and stare decisis and the rules of the rules, he may not vote for a hearing.
Well, he already said it's precedent. So, he already made that clear, though.
He's got a lifetime job now.
I know.
I don't think he's too worried about getting kicked out of his gig.
I know, which I feel is ridiculous too.
The fact of the matter is that you ask how long it takes.
Yeah, how long will it take? How long would it take?
Well, it depends where it starts out. This is a case that would start out in the federal system because you're dealing with the constitutionality of a statute.
So it'd already start out in the federal court.
So you'd start out in the federal district court someplace, where somebody will forum shop it to find the most either most liberal or the most conservative, depending on who you are, because that's where you want to have your case.
Right, of course.
Like this case that came out that decided Obamacare was unconstitutional. I mean, it's been, 8 years since, and we're finally getting a decision that says it's unconstitutional.
Wow.
And the reasoning on that, by the way, just to digress for a minute, the reasoning from the federal district court judge I thought was kind of interesting. He said, well, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality because they said it was a taxing issue. It was collecting money on the mandate. And since that court has decided that was the only reason to keep it constitutional, and the mandate is now gone, that means the whole thing should go away. I mean, that's a little tortuous reasoning, but that's the reasoning.
Well, they're just trying to get, they're trying to get rid of it.
It'll go to the district court, the United States Court of Appeals,
right,
which is the intermediary court between the district court, which is the trial court, and the Supreme Court. The district Court of Appeals. And I was just thinking about a friend of mine today who used to be the Chief Justice of the United States Court of Appeals in Washington. Decent guy. If it goes before him, I could tell you what the result would be, just from knowing him and having read his opinions. But it'll go to the ninth. It'll go to some circuit, probably not the Ninth Circuit because it's a very liberal circuit. And you go down and you look in the southern districts. Their courts of appeals, whether it's in New Orleans or otherwise, they're very, very conservative. And so
but how does it travel from one to the other? Do they just file there? Or is that how it works?
You file it in the district court having jurisdiction or venue over the case, and people will move to either send it somewhere else. There's a concept called forum nonconvenience.
But I'm saying, how does it move? Like, where was this opinion from Obamacare? This judge, where was he from?
He's Texas.
Okay, so he's from Texas. So would they file an appeal?
Yes.
Like in California, could they do that? They have to do it in Texas.
Yes.
Okay, so that
in the circuit that the district court is located.
Okay, so the circuit, so whatever the circuit is.
Yes,
and that'd be in the South.
It might be in Houston. It could be in Oklahoma.
Okay, it could be in the South.
There's only I'm not really sure. I think there are only 12 circuits.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
And there are many federal district courts everywhere.
Right.
But the Circuit Court of Appeals must hear the case.
Right.
It's not discretionary. As long as you follow all the rules and you file it on time and you do all the things you're supposed to do to get there, and you have a record and status and standing, because that was raised in Roe versus Wade, standing of the parties. Somebody said that the doctor didn't have any standing. These things come up. And once that Circuit Court of Appeals makes a decision, then either party can move, that's the technical word, petition if you want, to the United States Supreme Court to hear the case.
Okay, there you go.
And it could sit there for 6 months, 9 months, where they decide whether to give it a hearing or not. If they grant a hearing, they set it on their calendar for the next session.
So
usually the next session.
So Obamacare is still in play right now.
So I heard something on the news as I was coming in today that they're not making any changes at the moment.
Okay.
But you're going to see. You know, where you're going to see changes in the House of Representatives.
Oh yeah.
They're going to draft their own covering pre-existing conditions. They're going to put stuff in there that this president is not going to want.
Yeah.
And neither will the drug companies and the insurance companies. But they're going to draft that kind of legislation, I suspect. That's their proclivity. And then it'll go to the Senate, and they'll vote it down.
Shoot it down.
Because there's 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats.
Right.
And so there's unlikely, even with the help of Susan Collins and others, I'm not so sure they'll ever pass anything. I don't think these people in Washington can do anything about any subject. They fight about everything.
Please, I mean, in the next 2 years, nothing's going to get done. Absolutely nothing.
Oh, somebody asked me last night if I thought Trump would survive in the next 2 years. Wanted my opinion. My opinion is no different than anybody else's. I don't know.
Tell us.
I don't know anything.
I'll tell you the odds in Vegas on it.
Well, what are the odds in Vegas?
4 to 5 that he gets impeached, even money that he doesn't. I just read it today on the show, on my show.
Well, getting impeached doesn't mean you get kicked out of office.
I know that. I got that, and we were talking about that. Doesn't mean that he's going to get kicked out of office.
No.
But he 4 to 5. That's what I was wondering when I was trying to. When I just there was a news story on it. They didn't say impeached and thrown out of office. They just said impeached. So 4 to 5 odds that he will be impeached.
What's the over and under?
What? I thought probably. I'd say 10 months. I don't know. I would say 10 months.
my opinion, and it's only an opinion.
Yeah, tell us.
Is I think he's going to ride out the 2 years.
You think he's not going to get impeached? You don't think there's impeachment proceedings?
They may impeach him, but they're not going to get him out.
That's what I'm saying. Okay,
and
I agree with that.
The argument now is that you can't indict a sitting president. The Democrats are saying that's not so because that's only an internal thing in the Department of Justice. That may be true.
How about they find something really
crime?
Yeah, corrupt or crime.
Well, they already have the 2 crimes.
Well, I'm just saying they find something else. I mean, they really.
Oh, they're not done. They're
not
done. But if you figure it takes them another 6 months to do it, you'll be in the middle of the presidential campaign again for 2020, and they'll be throwing rocks at each other, and there'll be all kinds of money raised. The swamp will be reallocated.
There's nobody in the swamp anymore, Judge. They don't want to be there. They're like, hey, I'm tired of draining this swamp.
Some new alligators will be around, and money will come up, and it'll fight it, and he'll survive it. Whether he gets renominated is another story. Whether he gets reelected is another story, but I think that he'll weather the storm.
Should we bet another bottle of something?
Can I afford another bottle of tequila? But I am going to Mexico. Oh, and by the way, we're going to have a couple of weeks off, ladies and gentlemen. So find something else to do at 4 o'clock or whatever you listen to the show.
Well, they're going to play Christmas music next Monday for Christmas Eve.
Are we opening up with Jingle Bells?
I think we're going to open a Baby It's Cold Outside. That's
and then, did you hear that story today?
Of course.
Many stations refuse to play that song.
I know.
One station is playing it continuously for 2 hours.
Good for them.
They have different versions, and they're going to play that song.
I played it too. And Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is supposed to be some sort of bullying the reindeer. The other reindeers wouldn't play with Rudolph. I mean, this whole thing is crazy, and Santa's like, a racist. People are nuts, Judge. People are absolutely crazy, man. I mean, they're turning Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Baby It's Cold Outside into some sort of political agenda.
But you know, that's the price we're paying for freedom.
Oh, I think it's stupidity.
Totally, it's the price we're paying for freedom. We should have the right to do all of this.
We do, but
however, whether it's appealing or whether it's tasteful is another story, and that gets back to original choice. You know, if you want to sit and watch some of these people perform, and other people think that they're crude and awful and whatever, your choice. You're willing to pay whatever it is to watch them. Go pay and watch them.
Rest in peace, George Carlin and Richard Pryor.
I loved George Carlin.
Love him.
I thought George Carlin. Somebody told me I look like him. I don't know if that's
a little bit, slightly.
But
I'll tell you, I went to see a show many years ago, and I can't say the word off the air, but he started this show with one word, and he got like a standing ovation for like 4 minutes. It was unbelievable, but I'll tell you off the air. I can't say it on the air.
Why, are we regulated, by the way?
Oh, absolutely.
We are. We can't say nasty things.
You can't use the 7 dirty words that George Carlin used to talk about.
Is that right?
Oh boy.
I think there's a constitutional issue there.
Well, take it up with.
You should have a right to say whatever you want.
You take it up with the owner of KCAA and his board ops.
I haven't talked to Fred in a long time, actually.
Well, I'll tell you, Judge, I'm doing fine, and you're doing a hell of a job, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, Judge.
Okay, well, we'll see you right after next. I got a guest coming. The Honorable Charles Rubin has agreed to be on.
Great.
And he is a fabulous, really, truly fabulous mediator. Now that he's retired from the bench.
Cool.
A great guy. I've known him for a long, long time, and I saw him the other day. I asked him to be on the show. He said, sure, he'd love to. So we're going to try to line up some great guests for next year.
I'll even get you a porn star next year.
Not personally.
No, I mean, be on the show.
Oh, I think that'd be a great show.
I've got one in mind for you.
Oh, I know you're going to make that
Maybe
one.
Maybe we'll get Roger Stone, too.
Let's keep trying for Roger.
I am. I'm in contact with them. I am in contact.
Tell Roger we're a soft audience.
We are.
We're very professional. We don't throw rocks at him. We don't attack him. We treat him nicely.
Make your vodka martini. Lots of ice.
I like that. That's a good idea.
I'll make you one, Judge.
Okay. Well, have a happy.
Happy New Year.
See you soon.
All right. Take care.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.